Hello, everyone. My name is John Barnshaw. I'm the Vice President for Research and Data Science at Ad Astra. And my presentation today will be on innovation in times of crisis, from research to action. So I'd like this session to be as collaborative as possible. And to that end, there's a lot of different ways to contact me. We're going to have a session at the end. We'll have questions and answers, but in the meantime, if you have a question, you don't hesitate to just reach out to me. You can reach me at jbarnshaw@aais.com, or you can find me on Twitter at John Barnshaw. I direct message me there, or find me on LinkedIn. And you can it can be real informal. It doesn't have to be Dear John or anything like that. Just say, John, I'd like to know more about one of the particular topics I'm going to cover today, or I'd like you to give a similar presentation at my institution, or I'd like to better understand what you said in this context. So I'm happy to do that and to collaborate with you as much as I can as we move forward together. So I wanted to pick up today where President Gordon Gee left off yesterday. If you didn't attend his session at Aspire yesterday, I strongly encourage you to attend it. It doesn't matter whether you're a public university or you're private, 2-year, 4-year. The comments he and Steve Cavazzi had were absolutely fabulous, and they kind of stuck with me. And you know, President Gee has been a president of a college or university for over 40 years, and he brings with him a wealth of experience. And what he said that I thought was so profound was that coming out of the pandemic, there are going to be 3 types of institutions. There's going to be those that have gone under, that are no longer viable and will be consolidated or will close. There will be those that are surviving, that are hanging on, that probably weren't in great shape before, and probably will be in even worse or about the same shape moving forward. And then there are those that are thriving. And he wanted all institutions to thrive because he thought it was in the best interest of higher education, that we're a diverse tapestry and we're stronger when we have more diverse institutions. I agree, but I also think the question really remains that's out there is, well, how do you transform your institution to thriving? How do you go from struggling to thriving? So that's a lot of what I'm going to be talking about over the next 30 or so minutes. So he also mentioned the idea of a next normal, that things are never going to go back to normal or as they were before, and there's not going to be a new normal. There's going to be a next normal, which is different, with different problems than what we had before. And the institutions that'll be best in the best position to actually move forward in that context are those that are thriving, and the institutions that are thriving are the ones that are innovating. So what do I really mean by that? Well, the title of my talk was From Research to Action, how you can innovate in times of crisis. And I'm going to pick up and explore that in great detail. So I think there are 5 elements to transitioning an institution from where you are today. Maybe you're struggling. Maybe you're not sure if you're going to stay open in the next 3 to 5 years. You're surviving, or maybe you're thriving and you want to continue to do that. This is not a 5-step process that if you do these things in order, then you're going to go straight to thriving. Some days it's a lot of fits and stops and starts, and hopefully we're making progress. But progress is not often a linear transition. But I do think there are 5 elements or themes here that that institutions that I see and that we work with at Astra are thriving. And they have 5 things, I think, in common. They've gone from responding to collaborating, from collaborating throughout to realigning and reprioritizing. And that reprioritization, realignment process has really reinvigorated units and some of the organization overall, and certainly the institution. And they're innovating. They're trying new things. Some don't work, but they're trying. And some of them are working, and there's already some success stories to share with you from COVID and the crisis. So last year, I ended my Aspire presentation with these comments. Start big, start small, just start. Doesn't necessarily matter where you start, but just start the process. And I would like to begin with that this year because I think it's more important than ever. When coronavirus happened and a lot of our institutions transitioned to online, we moved 500 institutions in a period of a few weeks from in-person to online. There was a lot of responding going on, and there was a lot of people that were overwhelmed, and that is normal and that's natural. We are going through not only a disaster, but really a catastrophe. I used to work in disaster research, and I was a disaster scholar before I got into higher education research. And a lot of the research and principles that we learned in disaster research, whether it relates to risk or to the pandemic itself, are directly applicable now. And one of the first things you learn in disaster preparedness is that the problems are often overwhelming that you're facing with at first, but you just start on a problem, you begin working it, and you continue to work it through as best you can. It doesn't matter if you take the biggest problem or a small problem. The most important thing you can do is to start the problem and start the work. And that's essentially what we began. Yesterday, Chris Marsicano of Davidson College presented his research from the College Crisis Initiative. And what he and his colleagues found was that in a period of about 3 weeks, 1,500 institutions transitioned from in-person to online. You can see the orange dots are those that announced a transition. Many of them had announced by March 12th, and certainly many more by March 18th. And by March 23rd, nearly 1,500 institutions had actually been online. And at Astra, we transitioned during that same period about 500 of our institutions. So for many of you that are listening today, you know this experience, this is your experience. But that collaboration of reaching out to Chris and saying, hey, here's what I'm seeing within our institutions, what are you seeing within the other 1,000 institutions or so that we don't work with, what are you seeing, began the start of a collaboration. And it began a collaboration of a fall plan survey. So when we got together over the summer, this was early summer around May, we really started to think already about fall plans. Many of you were building the course schedules for those fall plans. So we started small with a collaboration of, well, what are your fall plans? We did that research. For those of you that participated in that survey, thank you very much. I am forever grateful to you because none of this that I'm going to share throughout the rest of this presentation would have been possible without you. Without those 57 first institutions that took the time to answer those questions and help us learn a little bit more about you. And we did learn a lot. So one of the things that we learned is that a lot of you were doing things different. You were already started to respond to the crisis and you were starting to innovate. You were starting to try to change your trajectory, align to existing challenges and a new reality. And you can see there almost 90% of our institutions were limiting lab space, reducing dining and camping service, campus services, reducing study abroad, closing common spaces, and reducing some on-campus housing. So that led to more collaboration. We shared these results. We're continuing to share those results. And it helped us understand what kinds of things were influencing your decisions and your thought process as you move forward. And what we found was that the number one priority is the safety of students. When I speak to journalists and they'll ask me about, they might want to ask me about the political nature of fall plans or the epidemiological consequences. But I always come back to this first and foremost point, that most of you understand that safety is most important, the safety of the students, the faculty, and the staff. And that was borne out in this survey. And I think it's really important to underscore that that is what epidemiologists and disaster planners are really hoping for when they see people respond to a crisis, because they know that the only way to get to the next normal is by effectively treating the pandemic. And by focusing on safety first is a very wise course of action. And I always remind media about that. And I think it's worth noting here. What I also noticed from that survey was that our institutions, and yours in particular, were doing a fantastic job of effectively communicating. The survey we sent out was primarily to registrars and enrollment managers, and we asked a question: has senior leadership, your chief academic officer or provost, communicated about fall scheduling? Half of you strongly agreed that they had, and it was effective communication, about 49%. Another 33%, so about 82, 83% of you seem to think that there was a strong agreement on communication. Now, people said to me, well, don't you think that maybe that's a little bit of social desirability bias? The idea that the only people who are responding to your survey are those that are doing well. Well, I don't think so, because when we had more data to look at, where Chris and I began collaborating on fall plans, where we joined 5,000 or 3,000 institutions with the 500 that we had. So we had a full data set of about 3,000 plus institutions, and we learned some pretty interesting things. And one of the things that we learned was that our institutions, if you partner with Ad Astra, you are 15% more likely to have a plan when August 1st, which we targeted as the start date of the semester for many institutions. Many institutions normally begin that last week of August or in September after Labor Day. But if you recall, many institutions began earlier to try to go through a semester and to avoid as much of the winter term and the late fall as possible. So our institutions were 15% more likely to have a plan and to be ready when the semester started. I think that's really, really important in terms of, and that speaks very highly to you all at your institutions about your communication from your provost on down, as well as the collaboration that we've started with our teams on the consulting side led by Kim West. So we also saw that a lot of institutions were really starting to change their plans and to really align into the fall. And so by partnering with the College Crisis Initiative, we got great data and a lot of really good insights. And what we found was that most institutions are online for the fall. In fact, only about 4% as of the last census date were fully in person. Many are predominantly in person, which you hear a lot about, but a lot to the majority are, a plurality are primarily online, with the majority being hybrid or online, predominantly online. So how does this all matter in terms of a collaboration? How can we use research to help create some action? Well, one of the things that we were able to do in this partnership was to better understand data. So Ad Astra provided interns and some expertise on how to best understand that environment. And the College Crisis Initiative, in partnership with the Chronicle of Higher Education, put out a fantastic fall plans website where you can look and you can see your institution. It's completely searchable. You can see your institution there, and then you can look at the number of cases that are in a particular area. And this has real epidemiological consequences, as well as better understanding that safety that I mentioned a moment ago about how important it is for institutions to do that. So the research that we've made publicly available through support at Ad Astra and in partnership with the Chronicle and the College Crisis Initiative has directly impacted institutions in their plans. Many people went to this website to decide what they were going to do for their institution, and they looked at the data for the tracking, whether it's the COVID number of cases in the last 7 days or the total number of cases in the area. So it's been really helpful for institutions to have that data and to make a more informed decision about the safety for their campus and institution. Now, we didn't just look at that data and produce that dashboard. I did a lot of analysis in the early fall about some of the challenges and what did we learn and what impact does fall plans have on a variety of things. And what we found was that there was a political nature to this. If your state had, it didn't matter what particular metric it was more of a general effect. If your state was more likely to be Democrat, whether that was the governor or the control of the legislature or all three, you're more likely to be online. Conversely, if your state was controlled more likely from Republicans, whether that was a governor or the legislature or both, you're more likely to be in person. If you had an NCAA football team, you were more likely to be in person. If you had a higher percentage of students that had a registered disability, you're more likely to be online. So I'm working and collaborating right now with some colleagues that have a lot more expertise on disability in higher education to understand some of those implications. So we'll be sharing more on that topic with you later. If you were a Hispanic serving institution or a historically Black college or university, your institution was more likely to be online than other institutions. So that has some impacts for disparity and better understanding the challenges that minority serving institutions might face. And Sarita talked about some of those challenges yesterday, Sarita Brown with Excellencia. And then finally, selectivity mattered. So I looked at the prior achievement of students. So if your institution, the higher the percentage of SAT scores is measured by the 25th percentile in math or the 75th percentile, that top 25%, the more selective your institution was, the more likely you were to be online. So those are some of the factors that kind of influence that. What we were doing through that process is learning more and trying to share and communicate with you through that process as part of a partner in the higher education landscape. And that research led to additional collaboration with the College Crisis Initiative and the Chronicle of Higher Education. And the data I'm going to share with you today are data that are very, very new. They were actually released last week as part of a wonderful article by Eric Kelderman over at the Chronicle of Higher Education. And this is a survey of we attempted to reach out to almost all institutions. We got about 256 responses. We were able to stratify this because we had a whole population. And by putting a little bit of a weight adjustment, we've got some pretty interesting findings to share with you. I think the most relevant finding here is related to associates institutions. So 50% of associate institutions have seen a decline of 10% or more from their fall enrollment, from fall 19 to fall 20. That's pretty striking, so I'm going to repeat it again. Of associates or two-year institutions, 50% of them have seen a decline in their fall enrollment from 2019 to 2020 by more than 10%. So there's a lot of challenges in that sector of higher education, but that is not the only sector. We're seeing a lot of additional challenges from private institutions as well. So what does that mean? Well, how are institutions responding? How are they realigning their resources to address those challenges of substantially and significantly lower enrollment? About 14% of all institutions announced that they're beginning or plan to have academic program reviews, and another 10% announced that they will be conducting break-even analyses. So institutions are responding by first gathering data and then making some decisions. At least about 10% of them are. About a third of institutions are reducing their staff on some level. The largest reductions come from the non-tenure track part-time faculty, many times referred to as adjunct. Those part-time instructional staff have seen about 30% of their institutions have announced that they are reducing their part-time staff. That corresponds pretty well to 27% of institutions have reduced their administrative staff. About a quarter have reduced their full-time support. That's academic support. And then about 12% reduced their non-tenure track staff, and only about 4% have reduced their tenure track faculty. So from this, we talked a lot about reductions and challenges. This talk was supposed to be about alignment and thriving. So how do we get from where we are? We started off responding, which I think is a very normal process in any kind of disaster or pandemic. The response phase is largely characterized by people reacting and doing what they think is the best thing to do in that particular moment. But what I think is really important is to be able to focus on realigning, being strategic about how you realign, and then using that realignment as an opportunity to reinvigorate academic programs, reinvigorate administrative opportunities and partnerships and collaborations, which will lead to new innovation. And innovation is really the key to thriving, as I mentioned earlier. So I want to drive this point home, that most of the innovation comes from reinvigorating. If you focus on just saying to yourself, well, I'll just innovate. Well, innovation is not something by and large that's tabula rasa. You don't just begin with a blank slate and start innovating. You work a problem and you focus on how you can make a process better or how you can get better at what you do. And that is it can be really reinvigorating, but realigning and readjusting to a next normal is so important. And that's what seeds innovation. It's not just, oh, I have a completely new idea and I'm going to take an institution in a completely new direction. That rarely is successful. What's successful is reinvigorating, realigning, and then going in and doing the work of innovating. So I mentioned that there's these elements. They're not necessarily a process. And then I go and say, well, there's step one. Okay, there's one step in this process that I'm pretty sure that you should avoid before you do anything else. And that is, if you want to reinvigorate, if you want to innovate in your institutions, if you want to get to thriving, you avoid mimetic isomorphism. Now that is a very nice word. It's a $3 academic word. Chris at the College Crisis Initiative wrote a really nice paper on it. What does that mean? Well, mimetic isomorphism means that you're essentially mimicking the change of others. You really want to avoid mimicking the change of others because that's really a safe way to maintain legitimacy. So this is mimetic isomorphism is a pretty popular concept in organizational theory and organizational literature. I studied a lot in the sociology of organizations, and what it really comes down to, the best example that many people could think of is actually a university. You don't want to copy what other people are doing, and the classic example that is given in the literature is if you go and you hire a rock star faculty member from another institution to your institution, that's effectively mimetic isomorphism, that you've essentially copied and pasted and hoped for the same result. The reason why that's not a great idea is that really breakthrough, paradigm changing, innovative work, which you might have hired that person to do, rarely happens. And when it does happen, it almost never happens with the same person. It's rare that one person will create and innovate have paradigm breaking research and then go and break their own paradigm again that they fostered in. So what people say that you should do, and what the literature says, is that you should come up with ways to do things differently, be more diverse, attract diverse faculty that are hungry, that are young, that are willing to change, that don't want to settle for the status quo. And it's not just faculty, it's administrators. Administrators really must focus on not looking around at other people. President Gee has been around higher ed and a president for 40 years. And he talked about how his aversion to US News and World Report. I work with so many institutions that are focused on just reproducing what other people do so that they can slightly move up in those rankings. I worked for years at AAUP to work with institutions on those rankings and through consulting. Your best way to attract new people and to do things to get that enrollment up is to innovate, to find new ways to do different things to arrive at a uniquely different solution. So how can we help with that? Well, the step two, and this is really where it ends for us, is we have a lot of different solutions in the managing the academic enterprise. But this is just kind of it's really a conversation starter. These are some of the things that we do at Ad Astra, and there's some things that you might be interested in. And what we do is we sit down and we talk to institutions and say, it sounds like you're interested in this, and we'd like to see if we can build a roadmap to help you be successful. So that's what I'm going to spend the rest of my time talking about today, is how can you reinvigorate through research and action? Well, I'm going to give you an example of an institution that we worked with. And this is, if you can almost think of this diagram here as a subway chart. In subways around the world, there's always stops that are circles and then lines that connect the line as one unified line. So here's 3 steps on a journey for an institution. The institution was very concerned about their financial health. They thought that pathways and looking at the course schedule was a way to do it. And then they wanted to focus on schedule refinement, actually taking action and innovating in that process. This institution I talked with earlier today, their head count is 4,000, their FTE is about 3,000, and that is down 11% from last fall. So they are one of the 50% of 2-year institutions that are down in higher ed. Now, many of you might be at a 4-year institution, and you might say, well, it's great that he's going to highlight 2-year institutions. I get it. They're the ones that are struggling the most. But John, you don't really understand. It's different at a 4-year institution. Our institutions have a high degree of unionization. There's very little change that we can make. Well, this institution has 3 separate union contracts, one for full-time, one for part-time, and one for mid-level administrators or support staff. They have transitioned to primarily online, and although they've seen an 11% decline in enrollment, the COVID outbreak has not really been so severe in their area, 18 cases in the last 7 days per 100,000 residents. But they're looking still nonetheless in a state with a high degree of unionization and a public 2-year institution, still looking at about a 10% projected budget cut. So how can we help? How are we helping to reevaluate this and reinvigorate this institution? Well, we've partnered with them to conduct break-even analyses. So that is something that we can offer as part of our solutions through the financial health portfolio. And we've partnered with them, and they have some great data to do a break-even analysis. And this is the first fundamental of financial health, is to better understand your academic programs. Why is that the first step? Because 75 to 80% of the variation in instructional cost is at the discipline level, and about 2/3 to 3/4 of the total operating expenditures are related to instructional costs. So this program is rather healthy in graphic design. You can see the green line exceeds the red line, and this program needs about 45 students before it can start generating contribution margin or revenue. The good news is there are 70 students currently enrolled in the program. So in terms of enrollment health, there's some strong financial position for this program. If it were that easy, then we would just move on and call it an unqualified success. It's not. There are other programs that are losing a substantial amount of money. One of those programs at this institution is aircraft maintenance. Now, your program and your institution might not have aircraft maintenance. If you're at a four-year institution, it might be equine science or physics or another related program, chemistry. Other programs, not all programs generate margin or revenue. But it's important to know first where your revenue is and then where your losses might be occurring. And this is one of those programs. So what they did was they said, well, there's some challenges here. We partnered with them to give them some labor market analytics. And you can see here in this area of the country that airplane technology program was considered a high priority by the community in terms of this local government, because it was seen to try to attract new business. From our labor market analytics, which we partnered with, which I think I mentioned last year, we can help you better understand the labor market analytics in particular programs across the country. And we're doing that with many institutions. You can see that they're projecting a 30% decline in this field right now. So what they said and how this is reinvigorating is they use that data and research to take action. And they said, if this is a priority for the community, that's great. We have some students that are really interested in it and they're passionate about it. But we're going to need some additional resources. And if it's a while to get this program up and running to meet the demand of what the market might be in 5 years, then that's helpful for us to know. But if it's not, then we might need to pursue other things. So that's real world of what's going on in higher education right now. They're also committed to pathways and really understanding the pathways as part of that equation. So they started with finance, and that led them to a closer look at their pathways. Our institutions, we kind of have a solution called degree velocity. If you're new for the first time and have never heard that term, you're probably familiar with 2-year, 4-year graduation rates in higher ed. They're great. They're publicly available in iPads. I use them all the time. But one limitation of them is that they are after the fact metrics. So they essentially say what percentage of students cross the finish line in 2 years or 4 years. That means and that necessitates that you really have very limited opportunity to intervene with the students that are currently at your institution. So what do we do and how can we change that equation? Well, through degree velocity, you can look at your students in real time and better understand how you can graduate more students faster. So this institution, the average time to completion for a 2-year degree is over 4 years. The reason why that is the case is because it takes about 17 credits per year for students to graduate, or students are taking about 17 credits per year on average, and only about 12 count towards their degree. Now, we generally recommend 30 credits in a year because that will ensure on-time completion for a 2-year or 4-year degree. So because many of their students are part-time, that's why we're seeing a lower average at the institutional level, but certainly there's an opportunity to improve. That time to degree is not uniformly distributed throughout the institution. As you can see here on the x-axis, that is the time to degree. And the bubble plots indicate the number of students that are in that pathway. So you can see the institution's bubble plot is right there in the center. It's about 4.3 years. And the y-axis is showing us the cost per FTE student, full-time equivalent student. So you can see that there are some programs where students are graduating faster than the average of the institution, and those programs cost less. General studies is a good example of that. So that's an important thing to mention and to note that general studies is a program that generates over 1,000, there's 1,000 students in that pathway. It's revenue generating, and there's a lower than a lower cost per FTE than most programs at that institution. Now, the reason why that's important to make note of is that normally that's considered the high generating revenue cash cow or revenue generating unit. That program has seen a substantial decline because students who might have began or would consider transferring have decided to put their program on hold. So it's important not only to just give a pass to programs that have always generated revenue and student credit hour production and have good on-time and completion rates, it's equally as important to look at them as well, because the position might have changed. And if you were planning on subventing or using a lot of that money and it's not there, that's something you're going to need to think about. There are other programs where it's a little bit more of a challenge to get students to graduate on time. But part of that has to do with the pathway. Are we making sure that we are getting students in the pathway as quickly as possible? That gets right back to our software solution, Align. And in Align, this institution is able to look at those courses. And what they found is that in some of the programs that were having suboptimal time to completion rates that were cost either a significant amount of money or could be potentially opportunities for greater revenue generation, that English and math were gateways and were challenges. And you can see that right now that in English, this is building for the fall 2021 schedule. You can look at this in Align if you have that solution. This is theirs. There's an opportunity for increasing the sections for English. For math and some other fields, not so much. And that's directly related to the challenges of 11% decline in enrollment from fall to fall. You can't continue to roll forward the same schedule that you did last year expecting a better result. You've got to align and you've got to innovate. And that's what this institution's doing. They know through research where they need to take action. Do you? Another institution. So I couldn't get away with having all of you here and not talk about the four-year space. So this is a very different decision journey. The institution really said, we want to get better at schedule refinement. We want to graduate more students faster, and that's our primary focus. But we are facing some budget challenges as well, and that's what we're looking for your help and guidance. And so this institution, four-year public institution, about 14,000 head count, 9,000 full-time equivalents. You can see their retention rate is about 70%. This is an ASCU type institution, American Association of State Colleges and Universities. Yesterday, we had the president of ASCU, Mildred Garcia, come and talk. And this is one of her institutions that we're very proud to work with. You can see the fall plan is hybrid, so they are not in person either. They're probably facing some substantial declines in enrollment, and the COVID cases per 100,000 is up substantially from our prior institution, but still not overwhelming compared to some of the institutions out here that are really facing significant challenges. So what do we know and what can we do? What we did was we looked at what are some of the requirements. So let's focus on the core and the fundamentals of schedule refinement and pathway construction. So if we want to build out a pathway, and as I mentioned earlier with degree velocity, one of the best ways to improve your degree velocity is make sure that all of your students, or as many as possible, are taking productive credits that count towards their degree plan to help them graduate on time or faster. And so there's really three things that you're looking at here. One is an absolute requirement. So that is a requirement of a student that is in the pathway. This is a class that is a degree plan class that is required for the degree. The second is a general education requirement. So it is a requirement of general ed. You can always, my favorite example is intro to psychology and intro to sociology. Those are general education requirements for many majors. English composition is a general education requirement for almost every major. It's degree granting. But there's also a couple other things. Whether the program has, it's neither an absolute requirement and it's neither a general education requirement. So you can think of that as being electives. And what you can see there is the average for an absolute requirement is 89% enrollment fill. And that enrollment ratio dips down to 68% for those electives. So that might be an opportunity to better align. But I want to focus on the opportunity here, which is let's look at both the absolute requirement and the general education requirement. Well, that comprises 95% enrollment ratio of those classes that both fulfill a general education requirement and an absolute requirement. So you can think about a sociology major that needs to take intro to psychology, those classes. It only makes up 5% of all the courses at that institution and 9% of the schedule. But there are 1,479 seats where there's pent-up demand and 33 opportunities for adding students in courses. So this research was done by Patrick Kane. Patrick's doing some great research on the consultation layer. He's a member of Kim West's team. The whole team is doing great stuff, but I want to give a shout out to Patrick on doing that great work. What is so important about the absolute requirement and general education requirement here is that if there are students that can't get courses that they need when they need them, and we know that those courses are there, why don't we offer them? We know the demand is there. We know that we can get teachers and faculty to hire, we can hire faculty if we don't have them, or we can have those faculty teach those courses. Let's go and do it, because that's an opportunity in these challenging times to generate revenue. This institution has that research, they have that insight through Align and absolute requirements using the consultative team. They now know where their opportunities lie and how they can take action. And along the way, it can improve their financial position. So in that way, starting to already reinvigorate their institution. They made a commitment. They said, our journey is going to start with schedule refinement. We want to live in the schedule. We want to refine it. We want to use that to build out pathways, the general education, foundational cornerstone classes of student success begin there. And that's how you have a positive influence on your retention, time to completion, graduation, which is something that Mildred and others talked about yesterday. And then finally, it actually has a positive impact on your financial position at your institution. That wasn't the primary focus of why they went into that, but that's where they ended up. And so by going through that process, they were able to reinvigorate and they were able to innovate. While others are having conversations about cuts, they're having conversations about growth. How did they get there? They focused on research and then taking action through stakeholder engagement. And that's how they got from innovation to thriving at their institution. So I want to kind of live and let you go before we open it up for questions and answers. I want to end with one kind of thing on preparing for the next normal. If there's one piece of advice in one sentence that I can give you, I hope it's this. The institutions that are thriving are the ones that are innovating. And that's what I hope to partner with you on over the next few minutes in our discussion and over the next year as we move forward together.